It was wartime, and they were labeled as a threat to the security of Canada. And so for over 4 years, they suffered, losing their homes, their belongings, and families were torn apart. Bruce Kirkpatrick now with This Week in History.
By 1914, 10,000 people of Japanese ancestry were permanent residents in Canada. Most lived on the West Coast. They faced discrimination from, among others, the Asiatic Exclusion League.
That was one of the groups that wasn't just against the Japanese, it was against Orientals, as they called them then.
During the First World War, Japanese Canadians volunteered in the Canadian Forces, hoping to prove their loyalty to Canada.
They were allies in the First World War, and after the First World War, those who had fought were given the vote, which none of the other Japanese had.
By 1941, there were 22,000 Japanese Canadians, 95% living in BC. At one point, they held about 50% of salmon fishing licenses, leading to public demands that this number be reduced or eliminated.
The Japanese were quite hard workers and were pulling in a lot of fish, so that was seen as competing with the non-Japanese fishermen.
In March 1941, Japanese Canadians were required to register and carry cards with their photo and thumbprint. Their fishing boats were seized and their schools closed. After the December 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, life for the Japanese in Canada became even more difficult.
A year later, on March 4th, 1942, the BC Security Commission was put in place to start evacuating Japanese so that there were no Japanese within 100 miles of the BC coast.
Families were given 24 to 48 hours to leave their homes and then sent to temporary detainment centers such as Hastings Park, now the PNE, where they were held until the men were sent to work camps and the women and children to internment camps in remote areas such as New Denver, Caslow, Slocan City, and more. Many of their possessions, homes and cars, were sold without their knowledge or permission. At the Tajmi camp near Hope, they had to buy their food at the BC Security Commission-run store using special coupons. The Japanese Red Cross sent care packages to Japanese interned in Canada. Not until 1949 were the restrictions removed. It was 4 years after Japan surrendered and the war ended that evacuated Japanese Canadians could return to the coast. Many never did, making a new life elsewhere in Canada.
This Week in History, brought to you by the Royal BC Museum, bringing British Columbia's stories together.